Hello, Ken Spriggs here with a short one video build of a figure for a friend of mine that he wants to give to his mother for Christmas. So he wanted me to make a 3D printed figure of Tony Stark as Iron Man. And I found a really cool bust on cgtrader.com, and I downloaded it, and I'll be painting that for him for Christmas. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I'm doing a quick one video build of this bust of Tony Stark as Iron Man. This is for a friend of mine. He wants to give it to his mother for Christmas because she likes Tony Stark as Iron Man. So it's a pretty cool bust. This is how it comes. And I didn't want to do an entire large figure. And he's pretty good sized for being a bust. Has a really nice likeness of him, I think. Doing a little bit of cleanup right now. For some reason, it has these really obvious lines that you can see right there. These are not print lines. Those are about 1 millimeter thick. So I don't know what that is. It's obviously part of the file. But I did a little bit of sanding down of them. A little bit of cleanup on some other parts. So I'm going to go ahead and get a coat of Tamiya Fine Surface Primer. And then we'll get a little better idea of what we're looking at. All right, so after I did some more sanding on the figure to try to remove most of those very noticeable lines, I went over it with some Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. Very good stuff. I really like this stuff a lot. It goes on smooth, but it puts a nice thick finish, and you can sand it very easily, as it says, and it feels pretty good. It filled a lot of the gaps, a lot of the little lines, so you can see this is looking a lot smoother. And I just went over it again with some more sandpaper, which is good too, because sanding over it kind of takes the primer and fills in any further gaps and lines that you need to take care of. So what I've been doing is been using a combination of just some sandpaper. I think this is like, what is this here? 180 grit. And I also have some, I think that's 400 grit. Yeah, 400 grit, a little bit smoother. I've also taken this foam sponge that I got, and I've been cutting little pieces off so I have a little bit of smaller piece to work with. So this is nice because I can press this foam piece down into the different grooves. And the nice thing about this figure is his armor, although it has a lot of lines in it and such, they're pretty deep. I'm not going to sand any of that away. Same with his face. The texture on his face, I'm not really sanding away. Basically, all I'm doing is just pressing it down and getting off some of those lines. You can even see here, there's a few more lines that you can see. So I sanded most of it down, and I'm ready to go ahead and put another coat of that primer. But before I do so, there are some little holes in the bottom that are some defects. You can see there, right there, that I'm going to go back over with some Bondo spot putty. I like using this stuff because it dries fairly quickly in a few hours, and then it sands as smooth as the rest of the resin. So I'm going to fill up any of those lines, go ahead and get a final sanding on that. And then I think maybe one more coat of this Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 primer ought to do it and give me a nice smooth surface on which to start painting. And then I can start painting Tony here. I'm not quite sure if I want to start with his head. Very different kind of color is going to be going on. Of course, his head's going to have flesh and other colors, and his hair are dark colors. But the armor is going to be different. I'm kind of thinking about doing maybe a black base and then going over that with some silver. I'm not going to use any outclads on this. I'm just going to use Tamiya's. I'm thinking like an aluminum A lot of these panels, some very tiny panels of these, have either silver or gold. So I'm gonna have to figure out in what order to do that. I might be better off, once I get like a black coat, to go over and paint in like the silver over the whole thing, because I can use the clear red over silver to get kind of that metallic armor look. But before I do that, I might do like the tiny gold parts. There's only a few of them. And then once those are dry, mask them off. That'll make it easier to then mask off also the silver pieces that stay silver. And then I can go back over and do just the red, which is going to be most of his armor is just going to be the red. And that's it. So, all right, but let me go ahead and get those patched up. We'll get another coat of primer and then we should be ready to start painting. All right, so I used the Bondo spot putty and I patched up the edges. There's a little bit right there that I still had to do one little more patching, but I'll get that painted over. The rest of it I got nice and sealed up and primered, so I have a nice finish on his armor. Got his face where I needed it to be, and I've started to paint the face. So I thought about which one I wanted to do first, because they're going to have really different types of painting schemes. The face, of course, as you can see, is going to start with a lighter off looking flesh tone, and then I'm going to add different texture and detail and things like that to it. His hair, of course, is going to be dark brown with highlights. Now the armor, I'm going to be doing the black basing, and I'm thinking I want to try to go with some Alclad aluminum and then paint clear red over top of that to give that a metallic red look. And the parts that I want to stay the aluminum, I'm going to mask over, and some of those are going to be gold as well. So I figured the best way to start would be with this face, since any flesh that I get on the part of the armor underneath, I can easily cover with the black, which will cover once I get the face masked off and it's painted. The opposite would have been harder to do if I got black over his neck, because there's some really close areas right there you can see, and I wanted to be sure to start with the light and then go with the darker. So I took some Tamiya flesh and I just mixed it with a little bit of white and just made it a little bit lighter. This is just the base coat for his skin. And I'm using the techniques that I learned at Wonderfest, and I went over that in a previous video, but I'll kind of show you the stages as I put each thing onto it. So the first thing, of course, like I said, is to do this flesh coat, which is really inaccurate. And then I'll go from there with some darker highlights, and then I'll show you each of the stages as I go. All right. All right, so here's the next layer that I put down. And just to kind of let you know, these are going to be very dark looking. And I'll use this term once because I know it's kind of a pun, but they're going to be very stark. Just kidding. But yes, they are going to be very stark contrast to begin with. The key to this in the process that I saw at Wonderfest is that you put on multiple layers. And the lower layers, like this right here, which I highlighted the creases in his skin, the different folds of skin, the wrinkles, that kind of thing around his eyes, his chin line, around his Adam's apple, that kind of thing, is that those areas are going to be slightly darker than the rest of his face. So I start with the darkest color, and in this case I'm using some burnt umber from Model Masters. And the next step that I will do is I will use a very light, I'm actually probably going to use sand from Model Masters. I'll take a look and see which ones I have. But those are also going to be pretty light. And I want to thin them down somewhat, possibly with some clear Tamiya, so it goes on like a very light coating. I don't want to get rid of all these darker shades, but I don't want them to be this obvious in this much of a contrast. And each layer that I'm doing, I'm building up some, leaving on some distinct colors like you see here, but blending it in as I go, so it'll look more like, you know, just one homogeneous skin. But if you get close up, you're going to see some little speckles and discolorations and the various colors that a person has within their skin, the skin tones and blemishes and things like that. So, all right, it'll all come together as I start to do it, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. So let me go ahead and get that blended down, and then we'll work on the next level of that. All right, so I went over the darker burnt umber on his face with some buff, Panzer Interior buff from Model Masters, and these are all acrylics. It's a very, very light kind of a tan. I think much closer to a realistic flesh. I did put a little bit of Tamiya semi-gloss clear into it, generally with the idea that I wanted to go over it lightly and leave a lot of it visible. Now, it did make it a little more glossy, so I don't want to use that in some future applications. But it's fine for here. So you can see, it looks like he's got some bruising a little bit, but nothing real super obvious. You can still make out some of the darker parts. They shade like under his chin and his wrinkles, around his Adam's apple, that kind of thing. His jawline. So that's kind of the idea. I don't want that to be super obvious, but I want it to be underneath the flesh, adding to the different layers to make it look like he's got different tones in his flesh, which real people do. So, all right. But what I'm going to do for future applications is I'm going to just keep working with the buff, which is a lighter kind of a flesh tone anyway. So let me go ahead and move on to the next application, the next layer of this, and I will apply that and show you how that's going to look. All right, so I'm doing some really detailed painting now on the figure's face. What I did was I took some Hall Red from Tamiya. Sorry for the airbrush in the background there. I mixed it in a cup with some white and some thinner, and I got a kind of a rose-colored look, which is what I want, to do some background again on his face and his lines and things like that. So in order to do very, very super fine lines, what I've done is my airbrush, which is a Renegade Chrome, which I really like. It's a very good airbrush. It has this little mechanism where you can turn this knob and bring this piece up so that when you pull it back, it only goes back so far, just a tiny bit. And I also have the air pressure on my airbrush down to about 15 psi, so that I'm barely getting any paint coming out at all. Let me kind of show you real quick. Hopefully the airbrush is not too noisy, but yeah, You can see like very little. If I get really close, I can get some fine little lines. Only trouble with it is it tends to clog when you do this and you have it in there and just a little bit's coming out. It doesn't clear out the brush as much from the pressure, but you can see I'm able to get a little bit of it coming out, and that's all that I want. So what I'm going to do now, I went over a lot of his wrinkles, and the lines on his face again, just a little bit with it. Now the rest of it, like on the rest of his skin, I'm just going to go in and do just some little bit of like squigglies and things like that. Hopefully you can see this on camera. And the purpose of this is just to add some texture and like blemishes and that sort of thing to the skin. And again, we're going to go over this with the buff again in order to get it all blended together. And this is still not the final view that I'm going to end up getting. With the idea that I want to get a bunch of different layers, like I said. And each layer I'm going to kind of bring together with some, get that clogged up. Let me get it unclogged that a bit and I'll be right back. All right, there we go. All right, so I just want a little bit of paint coming out. Just so I can get some speckles here and there. And it's okay if it splatters too, I don't mind. That kind of adds to it. I'll be doing that effect later on once I get the skin tone looking how I want it to look. But I just want to get some random colorations on his skin, which is going to look like the variations you're going to get in skin tone. Certainly, you know, deeper where like his wrinkles would be in his creases and that sort of thing, but less defined and the rest of it, so that it adds some depth to his face. It makes it look like it has real skin and different gradients and capillaries and things like that. So, okay, very good. So that's looking pretty good. So what I want to do is let that kind of dry here a bit. Won't take too long. And then I'm going to go back over it again with some of the buff in order to blend this back in. And that's kind of the key to all of this. Blend it back in. Haven't done anything with his lips yet, but let me just do a little bit of highlighting there. All right, so he did a terrible job of applying his lipstick. And this will all be knocked back again to a more reasonable look. And you just want to keep doing it until you get the look that you want and you get a nice random look on his face. So let me let that dry. And I will go ahead and apply some more of the buff and bring that back up to where we want it to be. So, all right. All right, so as you saw from the previous stills, I took a little detour. Now I did go ahead and put down the buff over top of the shading that I did. It's still not quite done, and it's a little glossy, so I know it looks kind of artificial. But I taped off his face and I painted his hair because I wanted to be able to see what his hair looked like so I could compare the skin to that, because obviously that's going to give me an idea of what the whole thing looks like. So I did put different shades into the hair. I used some NATO brown, some flat brown, a little bit of khaki, a little bit of gray, which I didn't want to do a whole lot of it, but I put a little bit in his temples, just a little, just to give it a bit of a shade. All right, so the next thing I want to do on his skin is I want to go ahead and put down some little speckles using my airbrush, and just sort of like I did before, where I take it down to a real low PSI and twist a little stop so a little bit's coming out, and I just want to do some very slight speckling and spattering over his face with a little bit more of the rose and something a little bit of a purplish tone, just to give kind of some blemishes and freckles and things like that. And then I'll go over it with one more light coat of something to bring it down to the final color. So, all right, definitely coming down towards a look that I want. All right, so as you saw from the previous stills, I did quite a bit more painting on his face. I pretty much finished it, his face and his hair. I did a little more tweaking, and I'll kind of show that at the end once I do the final reveal. And I think his face turned out really cool. I really like how it looks. So I taped off paint and papered all over his entire face to protect it. And I initially put down the gloss black from Alclad. And then I went over it with the polished aluminum, which you can still see here. What I'm doing is I'm going to have the red, clear red, go over top of the aluminum in order to give it kind of a metallic red look. But before I did that, what I did was I masked off several areas that I showed in the stills where I painted on some yellow. So like these two up here, the two on the sides, these ones here, two on the back. It was hard to get pictures of the back, so I just kind of, I knew that these were kind of yellowish gold, so I just kind of improvised. And so I painted it with just flat yellow from Tamiya. Then I went over it just really lightly with a misting of some Titan gold, just to give it a bit of a metallic, but keep it mostly yellow. And then once that was all done and dry, I pulled all the masks off, did the reverse mask. You can see here now I have tape on here masking off those parts. Also a few extra parts that are around those that are going to be silver, and things like his arc reactor in the middle that's going to stay silver. There's some little teeny pieces right down in here that are going to stay silver. So everything that I want to stay either silver or yellow, I have masked off. So now I'm ready to go ahead and do the clear red Tamiya over the whole armor and let that dry. And then I'll be able to go ahead and take all the masks off and then just do some touch-ups and then I'll be done with the bust, and then I'm just working on a base as well, which I'll give you a little peek here. Ta-da! I'll go over that here just a little bit. All right, so I'm working on a base for Ironman. So I showed in a previous still this part here. This is actually 0.015 styrene sheet. So I put the design into my vinyl cutter program, and I had to make it kind of an oval because the sheet of styrene is only 6 inches this way, but it's more than 7 this way. So he had to be about 7 inches to fit. So I had to make it kind of an oval. But I actually cut this out on my vinyl cutter. I could have gone a little deeper, so I had to do a little bit of scoring with an X-Acto knife, and then I was able to remove all the parts and get the design. So then I took a clear piece of, I guess it's acrylic, or I'm not sure what it was. I cut it out to the same size. I realized afterwards I didn't need to use acrylic because I'm not gonna light it, but it would be a good way to light it. So I painted that flat white first, and then I took some clear blue Tamiya and put it all over it. And then I wanted to stick this down, but I didn't want to use glue. So I sprayed a nice coat of satin clear, and then while it was still wet, I stuck this down onto it so it would adhere to it. The only downside is, as you can see, it kind of mottled the paint a little bit, but actually it looks pretty cool. I think it looks kind of cool. It's supposed to be his arc reactor in his chest, and then I just put some of this wide stripping around it and glued it in place. I finished off the edge with another little piece of round strip. So all I have to do now is go back, mask this off, paint this outer part the same metallic. This is actually a metallic gray. Decided to go a little bit different color than the colors on Ironman. So all right, so let me go ahead and get that painted, and then that'll be ready to go, and that'll finish up this build, and then I'll show the final reveal. All right, and there is the finished base that I put together pretty quickly. So I got the metallic gray around the entire circumference of it. All right, so nothing fancy, just a nice flat little base for him to sit on. So, all right, let me go ahead and get the figure, and then we will do the final reveal. All right, and there is my completed Tony Stark. So as you can see, I went ahead and got the red on the armor that I showed in the previous stills. I used Tamiya clear red over top of the Alclad polished aluminum, which makes it look metallic and really cool. I took off the masking for the other parts, that I left some silver and the gold that I painted, which was a combination of yellow. I started with just flat yellow, and then I put a little bit of misting of Titan gold over top of it to give it a metallic look. And you can see some silver around those parts as well that I left silver. A couple little silver pieces there on the side, certainly at the top. And then I did his arc reactor in the chest, and I just painted that with a little bit of misting of white after I blocked it off, and then took some of the clear blue and put that in to kind of highlight the center. I also put some clear blue on those little dots right there, and also on those parts right there, which are supposed to be lit up as well, and also on the back. All right, so I think he turned out fantastically. He's not glued down to the base yet, but there's my base. Got that all ready to go. But he's just gonna go right on there. All right, so really happy with how he's turned out. I think he looks pretty fantastic. I'm really happy with the skin tone and the blemishes, and it looks realistic. And his eyes, I think his eyes turned out really good. Took me a couple of tries to get the eyes right, like 3 different times, because he's basically kind of looking up. So his eyeballs, his pupils are at the top of his eyes, like he's looking up, kind of giving you some attitude. So I also went back and darkened up the hair a little bit with some black. I still wanted to keep some of the different shading within it, but his hair is darker. His hair is a dark brown, but it also looks black a lot of times in the pictures, and the same with his goatee and his eyebrows. So, all right. So very happy with how that turned out. All right, fantastic. Really enjoying doing the figure painting, especially the larger ones, and using the techniques that I learned at Wonderfest to do some really nice effects on it. So really pleased with how he ended up turning out. All right, so that's gonna wrap up this build. Really happy with how that's turned out. Not sure what the weird lines were that I got from the file. Never seen that before. So, but it worked out in the end. The resin for these is pretty easy to sand and clean up. So, all right. So I will go ahead and be giving that to my friend to give to his mother for Christmas. Sorry if I rushed some of the parts of this and didn't show as much of the progress, like painting his face and his armor and that sort of thing. But I was down to the wire, and it was crunch time to get it completed. Today's Christmas Eve, and I'm up the same day I'm uploading this, and I'm going to be heading out and traveling to Pennsylvania to visit my family for Christmas. So I wanted to get this all completed, had to get it completed to give to my friend who lives here in Indiana. So, all right. Well, thank you to all my subscribers. Thank you to all my new ones. And Merry Christmas to everybody, or Happy Holidays, whatever it is that you celebrate. And I hope you have time to spend with friends and family. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.